In this lesson, we are looking at encoding, decoding URIs. So we can do an encode, decode URI component as well as encode, decode URI. So what's the difference? It's the characters that get escaped. So with encode URI component, so if you use that method, all the escapes all characters except the ones below. And this is how you can write that. So getting the Windows location, you can encode URL using the URI component, and you can see what the difference here is. Also, there's some documentation, of course, at the Mozilla Developer Network. So they're using non-regular characters, and you can see how this gets encoded, as well as test. So test is probably more relevant for what you're doing. You can see test x equals test. So this is how it looks like within the string, and then encoded, it looks like this. So it escapes certain characters and outputs them within a more readable format. So when you pick it up on the other end, you don't have characters that you might not be able to utilize. Also, we're able to check to see if it contains components. So we can see if URI x is not equal to decode URI component x, we can see which characters are being included because of the difference between the two ways. So let's look at this in a little bit more depth. Opening up our editor, we're going to get the window location, so using window object and then location. It's going to return back the location, and this is the href. And we can console log that out just as we take it in. So this is just the regular URL. And then we can encode it. So encode URL, and using, this time we're going to use encode URI component. So taking the URL. And then we also have an option to decode the URL. So using encode, or actually this should be decode, of course, the URI component. And then here, if we pass in the one that we just encoded, we should be able to retrieve back that same one. So encoding, decoding, we can put it in an encoded format, and then we can also pull it out of that encoded format. And this is useful when you are programming, because you are going to find that in some cases, you do need to transform your string into different types of formats. So you see that we get our original URL, it gets passed in, and then it gets decoded again. So encoded, decoded. And there's also an option as well to use URL and just encode the URI. So this one is actually more common, and I'll show you how that one works. So we can pass in a URL for that one. So let's set up a URL. And this one I'm just gonna use a URL of a website. And then this particular website is taking in some parameters. So it's got an ID and it's got some other stuff. So more than hello world, and make sure we got a space in there, and output it into the console. So right now we're just going to encode it directly. So we've got our encode URI. So this is slightly different, as you're going to see, because there's different characters that are being escaped. So when we encode it, then you see that the big difference here is that the space turned into a %20, and the rest of it pretty much remained intact. So if we were to take that and if we were to decode that, so without making any changes, if we just do a decode on that URL, you're going to see that nothing changes. So we could pass it in and we could take it out and decode it. So if we want to pass in the encoded value and then decode that, you're going to see nothing changes because we're able to encode, decode, and decode obviously does the opposite of encode. So there is a difference if we take console log and we do an encode URI component. So there is going to be a difference in the URL. And you see that it's encoded the HTTP. So it's gotten the colon, it's gotten the forward slashes, and it's encoded everything. So this one might not be as useful, but they both are available in case you need them within your coding to restructure some of the wording. So the other one, the encode URI, doesn't escape these characters. So there's more characters that don't get escaped as opposed to the encode URI component. So there is a challenge for this one, and that's to take your favorite website and encode URI with the URL, and then also encode URI component with the URL. And the source code is below. You can try this out, and it's going to be the exact same example that I've just shown.